The late summer air in Florida is heavy, thick with humidity and the constant, low hum of cicadas. In August of 1990, the city of Gainesville was waking up to the familiar, vibrant energy that arrives every year with the fall semester. The University of Florida and the nearby Santa Fe Community College were beacons for thousands of young adults, drawing them away from their hometowns with the promise of independence, higher education, and bright futures. Gainesville was the quintessential college town, a place where bicycles outnumbered cars, where students studied under the shade of ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss, and where the most pressing concerns were, usually upcoming exams or weekend football games. It was a place of safety and optimism. But over the course of 4 sweltering days, that sense of security would be shattered entirely. A shadow fell over the community, bringing with it a profound tragedy that would forever alter the landscape of campus life across the United States. Pop culture often remembers the fictionalized thrillers inspired by these events. But the reality was not a movie. It was a devastating loss of 5 promising lives, followed by one of the most intensive, scientifically groundbreaking, and massive law enforcement investigations in American history. This is the story of the dedication of investigators, the triumph of forensic science, and the enduring legacy of 5 young students who will never be forgotten. To understand the magnitude of the tragedy, one must first understand the light that was extinguished. These were not mere statistics in a police file. They were daughters, sons, siblings, and friends. Sonja Larson was 18 years old, a freshman from Deerfield Beach, Florida. She was known for her radiant smile, her deep devotion to her family, and her protective nature over her friends. She had traveled to Gainesville with her longtime friend, 17-year-old Christina Powell. Christina was brilliant, an honors student who possessed a quiet grace and an immense potential. Together, they had rented a modest apartment off campus, eager to begin their transition into adulthood. They spent their first few days decorating their new home, completely unaware that they had been selected by a transient individual who had quietly slipped into the college town. Nearby lived 18-year-old Christa Hoyt. Christa was a remarkably driven young woman. While carrying a full course load as an honors student at Santa Fe Community College, she also worked as a records clerk for the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. She was deeply fascinated by law enforcement and criminal justice, harboring dreams of one day becoming a forensic chemist. She was highly organized, disciplined, and deeply respected by the deputies she worked alongside. In a different apartment complex, 23-year-old Tracy Paules and 23-year-old Manny Taboada shared a living space. They had been friends since high school in Miami. Tracy was a pre-law student, a former homecoming queen, and a star high school athlete with a fierce intellect and a compassionate heart. Manny was an architecture student, a young man known for his towering physical presence, his athletic build, and his incredibly gentle, loyal spirit. He was the kind of friend who always made sure everyone else was safe. These 5 individuals represented the very best of their generation, their lives brimming with ambition and hope. The timeline of the investigation began on Sunday, August 26, 1990. The parents of Christina Powell had been trying to reach her by telephone for days. When their calls went unanswered, a growing sense of unease prompted them to contact the authorities. Officers were dispatched to the off-campus apartment shared by Christina and Sonja to conduct a routine welfare check. What the responding officers discovered inside immediately triggered a massive law enforcement response. Both young women had sustained fatal injuries. The crime scene was highly methodical. The perpetrator had gained entry without drawing attention, and the interior of the apartment revealed a chilling level of organization. There was evidence that the perpetrator had lingered at the scene, taking his time to manipulate the environment before departing. The clinical precision of the crime scene indicated to investigators that they were not dealing with an amateur or a crime of passion, but rather a calculated, predatory individual. The following morning, Monday, August 27th, the Alachua County Sheriff's Office noticed the absence of one of their own. Christa Hoyt, The diligent and punctual records clerk had failed to report for her shift. Knowing her impeccable work ethic, her colleagues instantly knew something was terribly wrong. A deputy was dispatched to her duplex. Upon approaching the residence, the deputy found no signs of forced entry at the front, but an inspection of the rear revealed a compromised sliding glass door. Inside, the deputy discovered that Christa had also sustained fatal injuries. The scene was deeply disturbing. The perpetrator had arranged the environment in a highly specific, theatrical manner, seemingly designed to shock and traumatize the law enforcement officers who would inevitably discover it. The psychological profile of the suspect was escalating rapidly. This was someone who wanted an audience, someone who derived a sense of power from the terror he left in his wake. By Tuesday, August 28th, the entire city of Gainesville was paralyzed by fear. News of the three young women had saturated the local and national media. Friends and families were desperately trying to contact their loved ones. When friends were unable to reach Tracy Paules and Manny Taboada, they went to their apartment. There, they discovered the unthinkable. Both Tracy and Manny had become the latest victims. The physical evidence at the scene indicated that Manny, with his athletic build, had engaged in a fierce struggle with the intruder, fighting valiantly to protect himself and his roommate. Despite his heroic efforts, both young students suffered fatal injuries. In just 4 days, 5 young people had been taken. The reaction in Gainesville was unprecedented. A profound, suffocating panic gripped the university and the surrounding town. Thousands of students packed their belongings into their cars and fled the city, causing massive traffic jams on Interstate 75. Those who remained barricaded themselves indoors. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts, window locks, baseball bats, and pepper spray within hours. Students formed buddy systems, refusing to walk anywhere alone, even in broad daylight. The University of Florida transformed its campus into what looked like a militarized zone. The governor of Florida deployed the state police to assist local authorities, and the airspace over the city buzzed constantly with the sound of police helicopters. The media descended upon the town, dubbing the unknown assailant the Gainesville Ripper. The pressure on law enforcement to apprehend the perpetrator was immense, perhaps heavier than in any other case in Florida's history. A massive multi-agency task force was immediately assembled, headquartered in Gainesville. It included detectives from the Alachua County Sheriff's Office, the Gainesville Police Department, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and specialized behavioral analysts and forensic experts from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Over 100 investigators worked around the clock, fielding thousands of tips from a terrified public. In the early stages of the investigation, the intense pressure led to a significant false lead. Authorities focused their attention on an 18-year-old student named Edward Humphrey. Humphrey lived in the same apartment complex as Tracy and Manny. He had a history of erratic behavior and had recently been involved in altercations. The media quickly seized upon Humphrey, portraying him as the prime suspect. However, seasoned investigators knew that while behavioral red flags are important, physical evidence is the ultimate arbiter of truth. Despite the intense public scrutiny on Humphrey, the forensic teams working quietly in the laboratories knew that the biological evidence collected from the crime scenes did not match him. The science exonerated Edward Humphrey, forcing the task force to keep searching. The crucial breakthrough in the case did not come from a tip line or a suspicious person report in Gainesville. It came from a seemingly unrelated crime in a different city, highlighting the vital importance of interagency communication. In early September 1990, just weeks after the Gainesville tragedies, a man attempted to rob a grocery store in Ocala, Florida, a city located about 40 miles south of Gainesville. The robbery was clumsy. The suspect fled the scene in a stolen car, engaged in a high-speed pursuit with Marion County Sheriff's deputies, and eventually crashed the vehicle. The man was arrested and identified as Danny Rolling, a 36-year-old transient from Shreveport, Louisiana. Rolling had a lengthy criminal record involving burglaries and armed robberies, but he was not initially suspected of the Gainesville crimes. However, as Rolling sat in the Marion County Jail for the robbery, investigators across the state and across the country were analyzing data. The FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, a database designed to link unsolved crimes based on behavioral patterns, proved instrumental. Detectives in Shreveport, Louisiana, noted striking similarities between the Gainesville incidents and a cold case in their own jurisdiction. In November 1989, a prominent Shreveport family, the Grissams, had been discovered in their home having suffered fatal injuries. The method of entry, the specific ways the victims were treated, and the elaborate cleaning of the crime scene mirrored the clinical details of the Gainesville cases. The Shreveport detectives contacted the Florida Task Force. When Florida investigators learned that a Shreveport native, Danny Rolling, was currently sitting in an Ocala jail, the pieces of the puzzle began to snap into place. The investigation shifted entirely to Danny Rolling. Law enforcement officers returned to the wooded areas around the University of Florida campus, conducting exhaustive grid searches. In a secluded, heavily wooded area, they discovered a makeshift campsite. It was here that the forensic evidence began to mount overwhelmingly. Investigators recovered a bag containing a revolver, tools that matched pry marks found at the Gainesville crime scenes, and a cassette tape. The audio tape provided a chilling glimpse into the mind of the perpetrator. On the tape, Rolling had recorded himself singing folk songs and speaking to an imaginary companion, expressing a profound sense of alienation and a dark, wandering nature. Also found at the campsite was a bank robbery die pack that had exploded, further linking the camper to the Ocala robbery, and by extension, linking the Ocala robber to the Gainesville woods. But circumstantial evidence and behavioral profiles are not enough to secure a conviction in a court of law, particularly in a case carrying the potential for the ultimate penalty. The prosecution needed airtight, irrefutable science. In 1990, forensic DNA analysis was still in its relative infancy. It was not the rapid, highly automated process it is today. Investigators relied on a technique called restriction fragment length polymorphism, or RFLP. This process required relatively large amounts of biological material and took weeks, sometimes months, to yield results. Forensic technicians had meticulously gathered biological evidence from the Gainesville apartments. This evidence was transported under strict chain of custody protocols to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, and to specialized state laboratories. Scientists extracted the genetic material left by the perpetrator and compared it against the genetic profile obtained from Danny Rolling. The wait for the results was agonizing for the task force and for the families of the victims. When the data finally came back, the conclusion was absolute. The genetic markers matched Danny Rolling. The statistical probability of the evidence belonging to anyone else was billions to one. Furthermore, forensic odontologists analyzed a specific bite mark left at one of the crime scenes, matching it precisely to Rolling's dental impressions. Toolmark experts matched the screwdrivers found at the campsite to the gouges on the door frames of the victims' apartments. Blood typing and fiber analysis provided additional layers of corroboration. The task force had built an impenetrable wall of scientific evidence. Danny Rolling was no longer just a suspect. He was the scientifically proven perpetrator. In November 1991, a grand jury indicted Danny Rolling on 5 counts of first-degree murder, along with multiple counts of armed burglary and other severe felonies. The preparation for the trial took years. The prosecution, led by State Attorney Rod Smith, meticulously organized the massive volume of forensic data, expert testimonies, and crime scene analyses. The goal was to present a case so comprehensive that there could be no shadow of a doubt in the minds of the jury. The trial was scheduled to begin in early 1994. The media presence was overwhelming, with journalists from around the globe descending upon the courthouse. The families of Sonja, Christina, Christa, Tracy, and Manny braced themselves for the agonizing process of reliving their darkest days in a public forum. However, just as the trial was slated to begin, the courtroom was stunned by an unexpected development. Against the advice of his own defense counsel, Danny Rolling stood before the judge and entered a plea of guilty to all charges. He offered no elaborate explanation, stating simply that he knew what he had done and that he was guilty. By pleading guilty, Rolling bypassed the guilt phase of the trial entirely. But because the prosecution was seeking the death penalty, a penalty phase trial was still legally required. A jury would have to hear the evidence, weigh the aggravating and mitigating circumstances, and recommend whether Rolling should spend the rest of his life in prison or face execution. The penalty phase was a grueling, deeply emotional procedure. The prosecution's strategy was to demonstrate the cold, calculated, and heinous nature of the crimes. They presented the forensic evidence clinically, allowing the science to speak to the sheer brutality and methodical planning of the perpetrator. They detailed how Rolling had stalked the campus, identifying vulnerabilities in the apartments, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They highlighted the profound terror the victims must have felt. The most powerful moments of the penalty phase, however, came from the victim impact statements. The families of the 5 students took the stand to speak about the lives that had been stolen. They spoke of Christina's brilliance, Sonja's infectious laugh, Christa's dedication to public service, Tracy's athletic triumphs, and Manny's fierce loyalty. They painted a vivid picture of the immense void left in their families and in the world. Their testimonies shifted the focus of the courtroom away from the perpetrator and back to where it belonged, on the beautiful, promising lives that were violently interrupted. The defense attempted to present mitigating factors to spare Rolling's life. They delved into his history, detailing a childhood marked by severe abuse and neglect. They presented psychological experts who testified about his troubled mental state, his severe personality disorders, and his lifelong struggle with marginalization. The defense argued that while Rolling was undeniably responsible for the horrific acts, his actions were the product of a profoundly broken mind and a damaged upbringing, suggesting that life without the possibility of parole was the appropriate measure of justice. After hearing weeks of harrowing testimony and complex scientific evidence, the jury retreated to deliberate. The burden on their shoulders was immense. They had to weigh the tragic background of the perpetrator against the sheer magnitude of the suffering he had caused. On March 24, 1994, the jury returned with their recommendation. By a unanimous vote on all 5 counts, they recommended the death penalty. The presiding judge agreed with the jury's assessment, formally sentencing Danny Rolling to death. The legal appeals process lasted for over a decade, a standard procedure in capital cases to ensure that all constitutional rights were observed during the investigation and trial. Throughout this period, the families of the victims continued to endure the painful reminders of their loss, bound together by a tragedy no one should ever have to experience. Finally, in October 2006, all appeals were exhausted. Danny Rolling was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison, bringing the legal chapter of the Gainesville tragedies to a definitive close. But the story of this case does not end with the execution of the perpetrator. The true legacy of these events lies in the profound changes it sparked and the enduring memory of the victims. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, the landscape of university security across the nation underwent a massive transformation. The illusion of the college campus as an untouchable sanctuary was shattered, replaced by a new era of vigilance. Universities implemented stringent security protocols. The installation of electronic keycard access systems in dormitories became standard practice. Blue light emergency phone networks were erected along campus walkways, providing immediate connection to campus police. Background checks for university employees and strict visitor management protocols were established. The buddy system, once a temporary reaction to panic, evolved into institutionalized safety escort programs for students traveling at night. The sheer scale of the law enforcement response and the successful application of early DNA profiling set a new benchmark for how multi-agency task forces operate and how biological evidence is utilized to solve complex cases. Yet, the most vital legacy belongs to Sonja Larson, Christina Powell, Christa Hoyt, Tracy Paules, and Manny Taboada. The city of Gainesville and the university communities refused to let their memories be defined solely by the manner of their passing. Near the campus, a memorial wall was erected, painted with the names of the 5 students. It stands as a daily reminder of their lives. A memorial park was established, a quiet, peaceful space dedicated to their honor. Scholarships were created in their names, ensuring that their dreams of education, law, architecture, and public service would continue to be realized by future generations of students. They are remembered not as victims of a dark chapter, but as bright lights who brought joy to their families and their community. The investigation into the events of August 1990 stands as a testament to the relentless pursuit of truth. It showcases the dedication of law enforcement officers who worked to the point of exhaustion, the brilliance of forensic scientists who coaxed answers from invisible biological markers, and the resilience of a community that refused to be broken by fear. It reminds us that while the darkest aspects of human nature exist, they are ultimately matched by the unwavering commitment of society to seek justice and to protect the innocent. As we reflect on the meticulous forensic work and the profound human cost of this historic case, we are left to consider the ongoing balance between freedom and security. In an open society, particularly in the vibrant environments of our educational institutions, how do we maintain the spirit of independence and community while ensuring that the absolute safety of our students is never compromised? It is a question that universities, law enforcement, and communities continue to navigate every single day, guided by the memory of those who were lost.